serving, enduring. Suffering, serving, enduring the pain of the cross. King Jesus, you are worthy, you are worthy. King Jesus, you are holy, you are holy.
You're listening to the Centrepoint Vineyard podcast. We're a church on Sydney's northern beaches with Jesus and his kingdom at the centre. We hope this message is an encouragement to you.
King Jesus, you are worthy, you are worthy.
Thank you so much for your welcome. It feels like home, it feels like family. And as Lloyd said, taking time out, I just commend you guys, especially young parents, to just navigating what it looks like to bring little people to these events. But how wonderful that you have. It feels like home, and I love that, that we share practices and we share values across the globe in the Vineyard family. And there's so much ease here, and it's so easily expressed in the different contexts that we find ourselves. I just love, the authentic, honest relationship building. We didn't talk about that last night, but it's kind of obvious, isn't it? We're about knowing each other. We're about knowing what's happening for each other, and just building deep and building well relationally. I love that we do so much of that around food. I think we're real foodie people globally, and I think that's a wonderful thing. We love to eat together around a shared table, celebrating events with family, friends, and as communities. So very much one of our values and the marks of who we are as a people. It's such a wonderful connector. I met Lloyd actually at a camp, breakfast table of a youth camp just outside of Auckland. It was a training weekend, a YWAM training weekend, and there he was sitting with a couple of people I knew. So that was a meal I was glad I didn't miss. It's another story altogether, but yeah, it was just so great we met over toast. But yes, I just think, so many amazing things can happen around food, and I'm sure we could, if we went around the room now, we'd all be able to give examples of what's happened for us around meal tables. And in the time that we have this morning, I want to share and take a look at some scriptures and some thoughts on this core value that we often don't really talk about as a value, but that of practicing the art of biblical hospitality. Now, don't switch off on me. I'm not talking about setting tables and, eating croissants and coffee and tea and cakes. Not that there's anything wrong with tea and cakes. But, Henry Nouwen says, he says, the word hospitality conjures up images of tea parties and bland conversation and a general atmosphere of coziness. And it kind of does, right? But John Calvin says, no duty can be more pleasing or acceptable to God than to offer hospitality. So what is Christian hospitality, and how does it differ from cultural or social hospitality? The Webster Dictionary defines hospitality as a generous and friendly treatment of visitors and guests. In other words, hospitality is an industry whereby remuneration is at the centre. Yet the Greek definition of the word hospitality actually calls it the love for the stranger. It's to welcome the stranger, the welcome of the stranger, which is what we see as God's intention throughout the scriptures. I was really impacted by this book, and I just brought it along just to show you if you wanted to sort of dig any deeper. Christine Pohl wrote this book called Making Room in 1999, and we started a church in 2000, and this was a gift. I think she wrote it for me, but it really set us on a course in terms of this whole reorientation around biblical hospitality and the meaning of that in the context of this community that we were about to plant. So, and it was profound, and we did all sorts of stuff. I remember once we just made giant pots of soup and took them to the local market and sort of gave them away. And I said to everybody, just don't tell anybody where we're from. We just want to bless people, and it's free. So we did that kind of stuff. We used to roll the barbecue down to one of the local parks and just give away sausages on Sunday afternoons. We went on to do just various things in terms of this, following in a way this little thread which was centred in this practice, which was how do we connect with people outside of our church in ways that are normalised and inviting, people we don't know. And that was almost probably a question I've continued to hold ever since, and it's something I just want to share a little bit more today with you, because it's really meaningful, and I think it's a real important piece of what we do and who we are as believers. And we see it in the scriptures, from Genesis to Revelation. We see this theme of God as host, welcoming his people and inviting them to be generous and inclusive of others. Deuteronomy 10:19, he says, show your love for the stranger, for you were the strangers in the land of Egypt. As strangers in the land, Israel moved through the desert from Egypt to Canaan, and God continued to be gracious and generous. He was a generous host, and he provided daily meals, water, shoes that didn't wear out, guidance by fire and cloud, protection, shelter, and they're often an ungrateful people. Again, in Exodus 22:21, he says, do not mistreat a foreigner or oppress him, for you were a foreigner in Egypt. So their experiences as outcasts, suffering injustice, was supposed to teach them appropriate responses to strangers. And once jumping into the New Testament, we see Jesus himself was marginalised at birth. He's inclusive, and he empathises with the outcast. He honours those who were dishonoured. Zacchaeus in Luke 19, tells him, come on down out of that tree, I'm having lunch at your house today. He resists the attitudes and the judgments of the crowd and the disciples of this guy. So you see, we see hospitality here as resistance. This is quite a subversive thing when you start looking at the ways Jesus connected with people around this biblical sense of hospitality and this extending welcome, which is what the Father is doing to us today. He's extending a welcome, and we see that there's resistance in hospitality, resistance to societal norms. We see Jesus welcoming children. He affirmed and valued, humanness in others, and children were unimportant in that culture, even despised in the eyes of the world. So he's giving dignity and releasing dignity to all, and modelling that for them. So it was quite subversive in the culture when you think about the way Jesus was modelling this welcome and this embrace. When the larger society disregards or dishonours certain persons, small acts of respect and welcome are potent far beyond themselves. They point to a different system of valuing and alternate models of relationship, which is what he was doing. He was resisting, he was respecting, he was pointing to a different system, the system of the kingdom of God. He was welcoming the kingdom, he was welcoming and embracing and modelling the values that we recognise through his words and through his works. In the epistles, we follow Paul in Romans 12. Share with the saints in need, practice hospitality. And he's talking about this kind of hospitality, the kind of hospitality that it's thinking about those just outside your friend circle, thinking about those who are looking in on you, thinking about those who have needs, who are on the margins of our lives. And in that setting, of course, the divisions of class that dominated the Roman world, it was a classed society. But what they were seeing, the Romans, they were seeing that the Christians didn't have any distinctions in rank, and that they had concerns about recognition and human dignity. And we know that the gospel spread like wildfire, and this is the sort of thing that was probably confronting them with another way of doing life, another way of honouring and caring, and actually caring, full stop. It was happening through the witness of the early church. So it was transformative, a transformative potential for hospitality, offering care, offering shelter and food to needy strangers. And this remained a discipline that was central to the identity of the church, and it distinguished the early church from its surrounding environment. So, what a wonderful thing. And yet, do we see that today? my question is, when did this missional practice become marginalised? And we know that it has. So historically, until the Middle Ages, this practice of caring for those who cannot repay was a common practice in the early church and in the church. And then what happened around the Middle Ages, this practice of hands-on caring for the weak and the vulnerable in society drifted, and it was lost. And then two strands emerged, giving material care to strangers, and the poor became separated from hospitality. So we know today hospitality we see it as an industry, more than a kind of a benevolent caring of others on the margins. And it became redefined. Instead of inviting those in need, hospitality was frequently offered to those who could benefit the host. Business lunches. What's in it for me? If I get them over, we'll have a chat about this and so. It's not really about the food. It's about what we're going to talk about, what's on the table. So the business lunches, or the hierarchy within social or political circles, became front and centre. So it became about spending time and honouring those who could return the favour. So Henry Nouwen again, he says, if there is any concept worth restoring to its original depth and evocative potential, it is the concept of hospitality. And this is the kind of hospitality we're talking about here today. The kind of hospitality that we read about in the scriptures and that we have read about so far. So that question, it just sits with me, and I guess I'm sharing it with you, not in a kind of a way of like, okay, let's get busy, let's get going, let's get at it. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm sitting with the question, and I'm also bringing the question here, and I'd love us to hold it and to also let it ruminate within us, and also take it away and keep these questions before us prayerfully, and be asking the Lord, what does this mean for me? How do we extend a welcome to those on the edges and on the margins of our lives and of our neighbourhoods? How do we go about creating these shared spaces, these laying of tables without wood, places of equality, places where there's no sense of I'm doing for you, but we're doing together. Places where there's an equal sense, where there's an honouring and a sense of dignity that's being exchanged as much as what's being talked about or what's being shared. And so that's, this is going to be, these are unique moments. And I don't think we can presume to formulate, how do we do that? Although, because we know we're led by the Spirit, and we've been hearing this morning about Lloyd talking about the kingdom. And even with his diagram of the axis, we see that that little yellow dot of biblical hospitality was sitting nicely in the health and growth area, and so it is. It also sits for me sort of right smack at the centre of the axis, because I feel like it's central to both to what we do and who we are, and I'll explain that in a moment. But no, it's not formulaic. So how do we do this? And it's a rhetorical question. How might we further engage with this practice that has historically been so central to the Christian identity? I've got lots of stories. Because I lean into this. It's funny, even on the plane coming here, I couldn't help but notice a little elderly gentleman who looked cold. And growing up with me for my kids was quite stressful, because I'd be noticing things that were like, Mum. And there he was sitting there sort of looking cold, and he was Chinese, and I couldn't communicate with him, but his daughter, I think, was on the other side. And I offered him my blanket, which hadn't been unwrapped, and she said he doesn't want it. And I said, he saw me though, he saw me hand it. So he took it. Maybe he took it because I was a stranger and he was just not going to take it from his daughter. But he took it, and then she unwrapped it and he put it on, and then that was the end of it. But when I was leaving the plane, she came up and she sought me out and she said, thank you. She said, thank you for doing that. She said he wasn't going to take it from me, but he took it from you, and thank you. And she said, have a lovely weekend. And so it was just an exchange, and it was just a moment of extending kindness, but it's just these are the moments that I would classify as biblical hospitality, of reaching out with our hearts, reaching out with what's in our hand and what we've got to give away in that moment to someone who has a need. Not necessarily feeling we've got to strap that, these people to our backs, and then consider, how does that man stay warm for the next 5 years? Sometimes we worry about when we do things that we're now settling or becoming someone's saviour. So I think it's one of the reasons why we pull back a little bit. We think, what will this mean for me now going forward with this person? In fact, there's a guy who sits sometimes just at our fruit shop, and we've talked a lot. He's needy financially, and I usually give him something to eat. But one day we've built such a great friendship. I walk past and I go, "Do you want a banana?" Like you would say to a friend or a kid, and he goes, "Yeah." So I just gave him a banana and I kept walking. So you just have this natural kind of like connection on the street with someone who, he didn't feel like I was speaking down to him or just, doing something to him. But we were doing something together. It was shared and we had a wee exchange. And I think it's around what does it look like and feel like to be ourselves, to be in our own, with our dynamics, with our own personalities, and our own resources. What does it sort of look like as we do that? I mentioned this sense of the biblical community, biblical hospitality being at the centre of the access, because I sort of feel like, and maybe the story of the Samaritan woman models it or illustrates it the best. Jesus comes along, he asks for water, and it's a moment of community building. He's building a relationship. There's food involved, water involved, and then here we sit on the access. So community building is here. And then next thing you know, he's got words of knowledge, so kingdom expansion is happening over here. Right in the middle of that, in that axis, is biblical hospitality. And I think, just the beauty and the strength, that's why I say it is subversive and it's powerful and it's overlooked, because it leads to things that create change. It leads to things that bring healing. And for her, she said, come to her village, come and meet a man who told me everything I've ever done. And so there's kingdom expansion from a glass of water and sort of community building. So it sits for me, and not only in the healthy growth area, but right on that axis of reaching this way to build community. Even if it's just like, do you want a banana? And over to this side to seeing what was God saying, what is the Lord saying, what maybe could be different. Let me share another story, and that is that. One that I feel like, sometimes stepping into these spaces, we step in knowing we're doing what Jesus, we're sort of trying to notice and do the things Jesus noticed and did. And as Lloyd shared already, John 5:19 tells us that he said, "I only do what the Father is doing." So it's about noticing as we go. What am I noticing? And maybe is that you, Lord, pointing something out to me? A number of years ago, in our church, we had this girl arrive, and she came to the back. She sat on the floor. She had as much hair in the front of her face as she did in the back, so we couldn't see her eyes. And so I went and sat on the floor with her, just sort of sat there, back wall. And then I did that every week. She turned up, just went and sat with her, and then we started to chat, and we built a wee bit of just. We had some conversation, built a little bit of relationship, and occasionally, I think she told me later that I would hug her as she stood up to leave, and then she told me then she got a haircut. That was the first thing I noticed. I could see her eyes; she was gorgeous, and I said, "Wow, look at that beautiful haircut, and there was this lovely face that I could then engage with." And from there, she told me she was going to do some travelling and she was going to do some walks, some of our great walks at Aotearoa. And she came back having done one, and she said, "I want to show you a photo." So she shows me a photo of her on a swing bridge on a particular walk that I won't mention. And she says to me, and this is quite impacting. She says to me, "When I came to your country from Europe, I'd made a decision. I was going to come here, and on this walk, on that bridge, I was going to take my own life." And she said, "But I came to your church," and she said, "And I feel like, you've hugged me, and I feel I've kind of something's changed in me. I've got hope." So that I was absolutely. Well, of course, I just felt overwhelmed but grateful. But I think the thing is, that's what I mean about subversive. We do these things with innocence and care, and we have no idea sometimes what will take place as a result of our touch, of our word, of our offering, of our presence. We still hear from her. She went home and retrained, and we still get letters, and And I just thought I'd share that as an incredible example of just responding to what those little hunches. Simple. That was such a simple thing to do. So these come along in their unique opportunities in nature, and as I said, I don't want for a moment to presume that they're formulaic in approach. But I thought what I'd do is just maybe run through a few things that I have found sort of helpful around engaging with people who are maybe I'm not 100% comfortable with, or people who aren't in my circle, but people who I notice. And as I do, perhaps, you can read those, but I'll just share a story. Now, I think, it's interesting, sometimes when things happen to us or we experience something, we're on the receiving end of it, it makes it even more meaningful. And we almost are more intentional if we've been blessed or ministered to in some way. So for me, leaving home and moving to Auckland, as I shared last night, I became the stranger. Now, having grown up in a very strong intergenerational family, I was not the stranger. I never knew what that felt like. So I move away. I knew my flatmate and one other person to a big city, and I was green as grass. Couldn't cook. Could boil an egg, I think. Lived on toast, but just a huge shift for me culturally and also geographically, and I was lonely. So I joined the local church, and it was a real gift to me to go to that church. It was little, and when I walked in, I thought, oh, my flatmate went there, and I thought, oh, I don't think this is where I want to be. And I felt like the Holy Spirit said to me, this is your home. And I was like, really? So I stayed, and I grew, and I was embraced, and I was welcomed, and I found myself surrounded by people who were like aunties, people who were like grandmas, people who were like cousins. People who fed me, taught me to eat other things apart from toast, and just began to be integrated and welcomed. I received a welcome, and unbeknownst to me that, I didn't know that I was going to go on and have a life where I was going to be involved with of welcoming groups of people, of starting groups in my own home, of being involved in seeing with teams, churches planted. But it changed my perspective on how I saw people who were new, who were coming, and how they might have felt. And I think it was a real gift to me to have experienced that, and it influenced the way that I think I was able to connect and engage as a new and young leader. So intentionality is important, and I suppose that's what I've just shared. I became intentional because having received that welcome from others, knowing it was God's welcome through them, but for each of us, having received God's welcome as prodigals to the Father's love, part of His invitation to us is to be on the lookout for how to do that too, to extend to those who might be marginalised in our midst. Secondly, just realising the power of invitation. Hebrews 13:2 says, you don't even know you might be entertaining angels unawares. I love that. But you just don't know what He's up to, what He's doing. But to do that, the power of invitation, and asking God, open my eyes to see who you are pointing out, or who you're just helping me to notice. Maybe you're noticing someone who's struggling with, something, and you just think, can I help? It's just they need to be small, but connecting moments, and then asking, Lord, what else is going on here? Is there anything else you're inviting me to do or say? Thirdly, pay attention. Ask, what do I do about what's in front of me? Do I just nothing? Which is often the answer, except pray. I wonder sometimes when we see someone and we see a need, maybe we're seeing a situation that looks really difficult, but we know it's not ours to be involved in, whether just to go away and pray about it. We may be the only people that ever pray for that person on the planet. I've thought about that a few times. It's a very sort of sobering thought, but imagine if you were, or I was, the only person who prayed or asked the Lord to come and bless that person and change the situation and let the kingdom come. We may be the only one who does that, so paying attention. Susan Salzberg says, compassion is the natural result of paying attention. And Jesus, he did, he noticed, he paid attention, he gave everybody full attention, and then he acted, which is compassion. Fourthly, being empathetic. Empathy says, kind of a definition of empathy is taste but don't swallow. Walk a mile in someone's shoes, then get out. So we're not invited to be the person. We're invited to ask, what does it feel like to be you? And then step back. It's not our job to live that deeply in someone else's experience. Recently, Mum and I were in Christchurch. I took my mother to see her sister, who's coming up 94, and I took her to a wee spot that she hasn't seen before in Christchurch, and it's her hometown. It was like a great big sort of lovely riverside market, and so we bought some food to take back to the place we were staying, and I see this guy while we were waiting for the Uber, and he's young, he's sitting there, he's got his cap on the ground, and I thought, what's with that? You know, and so I said, how you going? He said, okay. I said, what's brought you here? Like, he goes, well, we couldn't pay the mortgage or blah, blah, blah. And he had a story, and he goes, me and my partner are living in a tent in the park. And I said, oh, man, that's so hard. And I said, are you hungry? He said, yes. So I gave him my dinner, mum's dinner. She's 90. And anyway, so I thought, oh dear, what are we going to eat now? So we had some eggs and stuff, and I go, sorry, Mum, I gave her dinner away. She really? But she was very gracious about it. And it was just an empathetic kind of moment. And I had something in my hand, so I gave it away. An example of how that didn't go well, I'll give it, because, hey, it doesn't always work out, does it? So this is a wee while ago, I was at the dairy and there was a chap there. So I thought, I said, would you like a pie? And he said yes, and then he said, and a strawberry milk. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's put the order in. And so I went to the dairy, I bought the pie, and I thought, you know what? I'm not going to buy a strawberry milk. I thought, I'm going to buy him some water. So buy water and a pie, give him the pie, and he says to me, when he sees the water, I said strawberry milk. And I was offended, and I said, well, water's good for you. And then he said, get a life. And I was like, man, I just did you a favour. And then I got in my car and thought about it, and I felt like it was a moment where I reflected on what I'd just done, and it was like the Spirit of God said to me, what did you expect? I was like, oh, well, this is not about you. This is about him. You have no idea what he's going through. He is in a very deep hole. So there's so much to be gained and there's so much to be changed. It's reciprocal. It's an opportunity for transformation. And once again, it's a shared experience. We're doing these things with each other, not for someone, particularly or only. And so I think we need to remind ourselves why this is important, that it's purposeful and it's purpose-filled. Because it's easy just to forget and lose that sense of why. But we're keepers of the why, and that's one thing I love our churches. We regularly talk about, well, why do we do that? Even last night, why do we worship the way we do? Why do we ask? Why do we welcome the Spirit? Why do we say Kingdom Come? And we regularly remind ourselves and remind ourselves of why we do what we do. And this is something I'd love us to take away as one of those whys. Why do we do biblical hospitality? Why do we grapple with this? Why do we ponder this? Why do we just keep coming back to it? And I'd love us to do that, even as we go from here. It isn't reflect, and I reflected on point 7, I reflected on how that was for me with that experience with the strawberry milk guy. That I learned something, it was humbling, and it was really good that I was convicted. Because it needed to happen. So reflect on what we're doing and how we felt about that, and not necessarily looking to sort of have stats on outcomes, but reflect and let's remember that this is not a marketing tool to grow our church. It's simply and purely the call to love our neighbour and get nothing out of it. So I think just freely give as we've freely received is what this is about. Number 8, risk. It is risky, and we need to be safe, and we need to be to not be doing things in places that are dangerous. We know, I'm just putting that out there. I'm sure you know that, but just we need to also consider our resources. How much time have I got? If we're really busy or we're occupied, very occupied, it may be a smile. So we're not going further than we need to go in any set of circumstances. But it's about noticing and just and asking those questions. What can I do here? How much? what does risk, what does stepping out in faith look like? Because John Wimber used to say, faith is spelled R-I-S-K. It is risky, but it's a faith step. It's a faith step that's got wisdom around it, and we're checking in on ourselves and also the situation we find ourselves in at the time. So, I think biblical hospitality is also, which we're not going to talk about today, but it's inextricably connected to justice and mercy. It challenges societal norms. It's a powerful, powerful gift that is undervalued and not frequently spoken about and often not considered. And so I guess I'm not sure quite how we're going for time, but I just want to, I don't want this to be burdensome for any of us. I don't want us to feel like, we've all been just given an extra thing to do. But I'm encouraging us to be willing to be attentive and to listen and to learn from him, and to love what he loves and all the myriad of expressions that he loves. And that's people. Matthew 25:40 says, "And the king will say, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me." And isn't that what we're doing? We just want to worship the Lord. This is worship. This is giving our lives away before his face. And you think about Revelation 21, talks about the marriage supper of the Lamb. It says that there's a table. We have the table. We have the banquet. Once again, God as host is making a table for us. Psalm 23, he prepares a table in the presence of others. So he's the homemaker. He's the host. He's always the host. We're always the recipients. But he says, go and be like me. Go and be like me in your family. Go and be like me in your community. Be like me wherever you can be, wherever you find yourself. This is beautiful, isn't it? You don't have to be extraordinary, and I think that's a bit of a theme that's coming through here this weekend. You need to be the ordinary, inhabited by the extraordinary life of God. A word, a meal, a cup of cold water have the capacity to bring the life of God to this world and delight his heart. So I guess I just want to encourage us to continue to adventure with God in this way. And extend the generous welcome that our hospitable God, that he has lavishly given to us, and that we would and you would here in Centrepoint flourish in your community as you do kingdom work and community building. You'd hold this lovely jewel in the middle of what does biblical hospitality look like there? And come back to that as he brings you to it.
Thanks so much for listening. To find out more, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, centrepointvineyard.org. Music is King Jesus by Sam Glover.
Pain of the cross, King Jesus.